In Nigeria, the national minimum wage is the lowest amount of money that the government at all levels should pay its workers monthly. It is set by the government to ensure that all workers receive a basic income. This baseline wage acts like an anchor, ensuring everyone gets paid at least a certain amount, so it is a safety net for workers in Nigeria. The idea is that this minimum wage should be enough to cover basic living expenses. Please like and share this video and subscribe to this channel. A trip down memory lane. Before independence, Obafemi Awolowo introduced the minimum wage in the Western region, setting it at 5 shillings and 6 pence for workers from October 1954. In contrast, workers in the Northern region earned only 2 shillings and 8 pence. He successfully implemented the first minimum wage policy in Nigeria and expressed disappointment over the federal government's refusal to establish a national policy of £5 minimum wage. Awolowo made the national minimum wage a campaign issue, but after independence, the Abubakar Tafawa Balewa government neglected the matter. Thus, before independence, while the federal government did not support a national minimum wage, the regions, particularly the Western region, pushed for it. In 1981, President Shehu Shagari signed the first national minimum wage law after a campaign championed by the Nigerian Labour Congress. This landmark legislation set the bar at 125 naira per month for full-time workers, excluding seasonal and small businesses. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly 265,000 naira today, more than 8 times the current meager minimum wage of 30,000 naira. This comparison shows a troubling decline in purchasing power for Nigerian workers. Nigeria's minimum wage has undergone several revisions since 1981. The first bump came in 2000 when the Obasanjo government raised the bar to 5,500 naira. Then in 2011, President Goodluck Jonathan ushered in a significant increase, jumping the minimum wage from 7,500 naira to 18,000 naira. This new standard applied to both public and private sector employers with a workforce of at least 50 people. Fast forward to 2019, and it was review time again. Labour unions set their sights high, demanding 30,000 naira per month. The federal government countered with 24,000 naira, while state governors proposed 20,000 naira. Negotiations were not smooth sailing. The National Council of State initially settled on 27,000 naira, but governors balked and offered a lower 22,500 naira. The Nigerian Labour Congress wasn't having it and pushed back with its initial demand of 30,000 naira. This number finally found favour with the federal government, leading to the National Minimum Wage Act of 2019. Signed by President Muhammadu Buhari, this law marked another significant hike, raising the national minimum wage from 18,000 naira to 30,000 naira per month. Currently, minimum wage negotiations are ongoing. In January 2024, the federal government, deploying considerable funds, established a committee to review the national minimum wage. Unfortunately, until the unions called and executed the strike, there was little urgency to reach a workable agreement. Both parties chose to maintain extreme positions with untenable figures given the current fiscal realities on Labour's part and the cost of living on the government's part. On Monday, 3rd June 2023, the Nigerian government announced its willingness to offer a national minimum wage higher than the previously proposed 60,000 naira after its initial refusal. This decision followed the strike action by organized labour over the wage issue. The announcement came from a tripartite committee meeting convened by the Secretary to the Government of the Federation. A joint circular issued by the committee at the end of the meeting was shared with the media. This development followed an appeal by the Junior Labour Minister Nkeruka Onyejocha on 29 May, urging the unions to be considerate and patriotic in their demands. The tripartite committee agreed to meet for 1 week to reach a consensus on the new national minimum wage. The committee also resolved that no worker would be victimized due to the industrial action. Needless to say, though the strike has been altered, a conclusive agreement has not been reached. How is the minimum wage set? The current Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria made fixing the national minimum wage an item in the exclusive list, so it can be legislated only by the National Assembly. So while the first 10 regions started the minimum wage, we have transformed this idea that was a regional initiative into one that only the federal government can determine. Government institutions like federal and state ministries are expected to follow the minimum wage guidelines and pay their employees at least that amount. This ensures some level of fairness and prevents government jobs from falling below its basic standard of pay. By law, the minimum wage should be reviewed every 5 years, but this is not strictly followed. Why is the discussion over the minimum wage controversial? The idea of a minimum wage is a well-intentioned one to ensure a basic standard of living for all workers. But raising it can be tricky, with potential consequences that spark debate. Let's explore this argument through the lens of Nigeria, a country with a recent history of minimum wage adjustment. The Cable reports that in Nigeria, there's often a disagreement between the federal government, which sets the minimum wage, and state governments that have to pay it. In 2019, for example, some state governors worried they couldn't even afford the proposed increase to 60,000 naira, struggling to pay the existing 18,000 naira. Despite increased funds from the Federation account and an additional 5 billion naira from the federal government, 15 state governments still haven't complied with the 30,000 naira minimum wage passed into law in 2019. And some others have chosen to pay only percentages of salaries to workers. Workers face disdain from political leaders and certain private sector entrepreneurs who prioritize their own luxurious lifestyles over ensuring fair wages for their employees. Also, negotiations to change the minimum wage are long and difficult. Labor unions push for an increase based on how expensive things are right now, while the government worries about how much it can afford to pay. Businesses also have a say, but their voice isn't as strong as the others. Notably missing from the table are local governments, even though the minimum wage directly affects them. Finding an amount everyone agrees on is rare. In early 2019, the national government suggested 27,000 naira, states offered 22,500 naira, and unions wouldn't budge from 30,000 naira. In the end, the federal government agreed to 30,000 naira. There are laws in place to make sure everyone follows the minimum wage, but they aren't always enforced. The law allows for fines and even jail time for not following it, but enforcement is weak. In fact, as of October 2023, 15 states still weren't paying the minimum wage set in 2019. What is the perspective of many Nigerians on the wage-induced strike action? There was broad popular support for the strike action. This is because Nigerians have witnessed lawmakers get even more benefits from their taxes. However, very little has been handed down to Nigerians, despite a 200% energy price increase in gasoline and diesel in less than a year. Most Nigerians have shown support for the minimum wage strikes, as the after effect of the minimum wage debate means salaried Nigerians will receive a bit of cushion. Also, this is the first time that there is a unified strategy from Nigerians on the general fight against inflation and economic mismanagement, which has seen over 130 million Nigerians from a population fall below the global poverty rate. Nigerians have opined that if they cannot be paid a 100,000 minimum wage, a senator should not be paid 13 million naira. When comparing Nigeria's wage situation with that of other countries, such as Morocco, a disturbing contrast emerges. In Morocco, the minimum wage is $350, while the Prime Minister earns $7,730, which is 22 times more. In Nigeria, however, the minimum wage is $20, but a Nigerian senator earns $26,000, which is 1,300 times more. The general sentiment is that if the government can afford to pay inflated salaries and benefits to those in power, especially with the recent increase in fuel prices from 180 naira to 750 naira, they should be able to pay a more realistic minimum wage and engage stakeholders in meaningful discussions. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has instructed the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, to submit a new minimum wage proposal. With this new submission, we anticipate significant improvement. However, does the minimum wage make things better for workers? A survey by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics revealed that between 2011 and 2012, about 1.43 million fully employed or underemployed individuals lost their jobs after a rise in minimum wage. While the labor force population increased, the total number of unemployed persons rose by 82.5% to 7.3 million. Another challenge is that Nigeria's minimum wage is not indexed to inflation. Inflation has outpaced wage growth, eroding the real purchasing power of workers. Their income buys less and less over time. How does the minimum wage impact inflation? Nigeria faces high inflation rates, with the April 2024 rate reaching 33.7%. Also, the food inflation is 40%, and hypercurrency devaluation means the minimum wage, which the Nigerian government earlier agreed at 60,000 naira, is not feasible with reality, which is why Nigeria's organized labor is pushing for a minimum wage higher than 400,000 naira. In reality, the government cannot afford to pay what the labor unions have proposed, but their benchmark amount is meant to secure a fair wage for workers. However, an increased minimum wage portends severe consequences for the economy. As Nairametrics reports, a substantial new minimum wage could lead to a wage price spiral, where higher wages lead to increased consumer spending, which in turn drives up prices and inflation. Implementing a higher minimum wage would require the government to infuse an additional 85 billion into the economy monthly, leading to increased borrowing or money printing, which could cause demand pull inflation. Also, small and medium-sized enterprises may struggle with increased wage costs, potentially resulting in layoffs or closures, which could negatively affect employment and economic productivity. Without corresponding increase in productivity, the higher wages would not be sustainable, and the government would have to resort to inflationary measures to meet its recurrent expenditure. What is the difference between the minimum wage and a living wage? In Nigeria, workers face a struggle, the gap between the minimum wage set by law and the living wage, which is what they actually need to survive. The government prioritizes the minimum wage, but labor unions are increasingly pushing for a living wage. The minimum wage acts as a safety net, ensuring workers receive a base income. However, it's often a point of contention between the federal government, who sets it, and state governments, who must pay it. The living wage, on the other hand, is an estimate of what is needed to cover basic necessities like food, housing, healthcare, and education. It is not a fixed amount and varies by location, family size, and lifestyle. Importantly, the current minimum wage falls short of a living wage in most cases. This gap creates challenges. Negotiations for minimum wage increases often focus on economic realities, but often fall short of what's needed for a decent life. Labor unions advocate for higher minimum wages to bridge the gap towards a living wage. This struggle came to a head recently when the House of Representatives urged the government to prioritize the living wage over the minimum wage. They argued for a shift in focus from setting a minimum wage to establishing a realistic living wage for Nigerians. However, a specific amount for this living wage wasn't mentioned. Where do we go from here? Raising the minimum wage is a double-edged sword. While it can significantly improve the living standards of low-income workers, it also has the potential to trigger inflation if not managed carefully. When wages increase, businesses may raise prices to cover higher labor costs, leading to a cycle of inflation that can erode the purchasing power of the very wage increase meant to benefit workers. To mitigate this, the government must implement complementary policies aimed at boosting productivity and controlling inflation. One of the most effective ways to manage the inflationary impact of wage increases is by improving productivity, particularly in sectors like agriculture and manufacturing. These sectors form the backbone of Nigeria's economy and employ a significant portion of the workforce. By investing in technology, infrastructure, and training, Nigerians can enhance productivity, which in turn can stabilize prices and support sustainable wage growth. Higher productivity means more goods and services are produced efficiently, reducing the pressure on prices. The recent actions by unions, including shutting down the electricity grid, highlight a critical issue in Nigeria's labor relations. While strikes are a legitimate form of protest, targeting essential services like electricity is highly disruptive and can be considered economic sabotage. Between March 2016 and June 2024, Nigeria's electricity grid was shut down by protesters or striking workers at least 4 times. Each time, the government condemned the actions but failed to take concrete steps to prevent recurrence. This lack of enforcement and legal action emboldens groups to use essential infrastructure as leverage, causing widespread disruption and economic losses. There is a pressing need for legal reforms to address this issue. Laws should be enacted to criminalize the shutdown of critical national infrastructure, ensuring that such actions are met with appropriate penalties. This will deter unions from resorting to such extreme measures and protect the interests of Nigerian citizens, businesses, and investors. To ensure that minimum wage adjustments are fair and reflective of economic realities, there should be a systematic review process. An annual or biannual review of the minimum wage aligned with increases in the cost of living would help maintain the balance between fair wages and economic stability. This system would ensure that wage increases are predictable and manageable and do not lead to sudden spikes in inflation.